amazing, like, right? But that's such an example of like what people hear, the branding in action, and what people see, the brand, can sometimes not connect. And it makes your mind just like, for a second, you have to figure it out.
Welcome to Process Makes Purpose, the podcast that explores innovative branding, digital marketing, and entrepreneurship. Our goal is to help you unlock your brand's full potential in today's digital landscape. Tune in to gain actionable knowledge and proven tactics to elevate your business.
All right, I guess we should get started here, huh, guys?
Sure.
All right.
It's our favorite topic.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think today, it would be good for us to jump into talking about brands. So this is the foundation that we started with Mosaic, and that's something that Sienna has done an amazing job over the past few years helping others discover what their brand is. And there's so much that goes into that word brand that I think like just defining what that word means and what we're talking about when we say that is the best place to jump off from. So I think before we even get started into, how to turn people that interact with your brand into advocates for your brand, just discussing like what even a brand is, right? So that's probably the first step right there. And I think, Sienna, you're the most equipped to have a good answer to that just based off of your background and the excellence that you've brought for customers for the past, your experience in the graphics world and all of that.
Sure. So I would describe branding first as what I would say most people describe it as the aesthetic ways that you promote your business. And that includes fonts, color choices, your logo, and then how everything works together on either a web page or digital resources or print collateral or what have you. But I think often what is misunderstood is the layer that where all of that comes from is all of the decisions about who you are, why you are the way you are, what makes you different, and attributes that just make you unique. And when you have that in line with all of the aesthetic decisions, that's when the brand is really strong. It's consistent, it's congruent, and it pulls from a place of uniqueness rather than just trying to look like everyone else. So in short, I would say the brand is not only on what you project on the outside, but also on the inside or behind the aesthetic wall that your business puts up.
I think that's a great way to kick that off. And I guess my first question to that, and like maybe something that we discussed more, is you talked a lot about the uniqueness of the brand, but then also how that plays out throughout, right? So I'm curious, what do you find are good ways to discover your uniqueness as a brand that will, help you display that to your audience and help hopefully captivate them, right? Like what makes you unique is what people will be drawn to versus, what your competitors have, right? So I'm just curious if you have ways that you personally discover uniqueness within these brands that you work with.
Yeah. So usually we do that through like an in-depth kickoff call. And our kickoff calls often feel like a therapy session because of how deep and vulnerable that we get with me and my client, whether it's a business or a solopreneur. And so we just basically like unravel all of the layers that had led them to where they are today, even starting with something as simple as like childhood. Like, tell me about your childhood and how how did you go from this to that, and your adversities in high school, how did that carry through in college, and then how did college decisions lead to your first job? And we just kind of keep going and going, and we start to see the themes that started really early on in these people's lives and how they have transferred to the business that they are leading today, because that is everyone's unique story. And so often I feel like what people do is when they're designing a brand, they project forward. They see what's working in the industry. They see who they want to be. They use attributes like, I want to be professional. I want to be inspiring. I want to be transformational. But those are also the same attributes that everyone else wants to be. So in order, I feel like, to develop a really authentic and strong brand, you actually have to look back at what makes you unique and then see how those attributes carry through into foundational values that influence how you lead your business, that are authentic to who you are and authentic to how you present to the world. Otherwise, you're just kind of looking like everyone else, and then the brand there's nothing unique about it, and there's nothing for people to hold on to. So I would just say looking back, looking at the values, where they came from, helps us design a really strong brand to help people move forward with that. And also creates reasons as to why, rather than, I want to be inspiring. Well, why? Well, it can derive all the way back to an experience they had when they were 16 years old and really changed the trajectory of their life. And I think when you figure out that, it makes the business that much more powerful for you because it's all connected and significant and impactful.
So do you find... Oh, yeah.
What?
Sorry, there was a little bit of a cut off there. But there was a little bit of buffering. I thought you were done with your thought.
Oh, okay.
Continue.
What?
Are you still talking, man?
No.
Oh.
Well, I'm just going to leave a little marker there for, we'll give Skylar some homework.
Okay. Did I just get cut off?
It just, yeah, it sounded like you were cut off for me. So that's why I started asking a question. I didn't know if you were actually done or not. So it was just buffering.
Okay, got it. All right, cool.
But in post, it'll look good. We'll have Skylar do some work there. I guess a question in relation to that would be when you talked about values and things like that, are there oftentimes, and oftentimes what I think happens is, like you said, people say, I want to be inspirational or professional, right? They have these things that they think are their values. Do you find that there's oftentimes a disconnect between the values that people say that they have and then when you ask these questions, the values that they actually have? Do you find that within your brand exercises?
I would say for maybe the businesses that require a rebrand, because these are people who've tried doing something that's not working. And so then you kind of have to pull back the layers, go back to the drawing board and see if how they're presenting is congruent with their values, and then what brand decisions they're making. And that goes for both aesthetic, like visual decisions, but also the way they operate and run their company, to see if those all are in line with the values that they may think they have. So I would say usually not in the case for like a new business because we're starting from scratch, but definitely for people who are like, man, I don't know what else to do. Sales are struggling. I'm not getting people to, I'm getting referrals, but I'm not getting, conversions from those. We start looking at the brand as a whole and seeing how to optimize different areas to make sure that they are all in line with the values that the business has.
So yeah, I think that's a great way to kind of segue into the next piece, which I would say is, as far as the branding goes, once you get all those things right, like you've done the research, you've found out the values, and now we're working on a word mark. How are you establishing that type of mindset that you take into the discovery call into the word marks, and how does that then play out inside the market, right? So like after now the audience is seeing this brand that you created, how are they then going to be able to pull out the values from the branding that you've created?
Well, by word mark, are you referring to the logo?
Yeah, like the logo, word mark, emblem, those components.
Yeah, I would say the logo often is more for the business owner than it is for the industry, because it's like a picture of their business and it's something that makes them feel accomplished for all of the work that they put into understanding the brand and how they want to come across to the world. Because often if you try to think about what other people want, it starts to look the same or it starts to resemble another brand. And so if it really comes from an authentic place, it eventually feels authentic too. And of course, you have to consider how the logo turns out in relation to the rest of the branding decisions to make sure it is in line with the industry and the users that you're trying to reach. But all in all, I say where it ends up is more of like, I would say kind of like a picture or a graphical representation of all the work you put into it. And then what was part 2 of the question?
And then how their customer or their audience would look at that brand and then be able to see the values that you tried to paint into it.
Yeah, I would say, and then that once people have a meaningful experience with the business, then that logo becomes a visual representation of the experience that they had. That could either be a positive experience, it could be a negative experience, or it could be neutral in a way that doesn't really leave an impact on them. The goal obviously is to have a positive enough impact so that they carry that logo with them as, kind of like a badge of honor. Like, I love this brand, I want to tell, or I love this business, I want to tell people about it, to the point that people buy merch and they literally wear advertisements of your business for you on shirts or hats or pants, or having it on the back of their car, that they feel that proud to represent the business. And we see, things of like brand loyalty, where people just stick it out because they just love the business so much. And then the logo becomes a picture of their affiliation, loyalty, and good experience with the brand.
That's really well said. And I think, like, as you were saying that, I'm a very like image minded person. So like when you're talking, there's like a lot of images that typically pop in my head. And one that stuck out was, the example of we're just willing to wear the brand, like the brand mark with us, right? And it establishes, it's something that we don't just identify the brand as, but we associate ourselves with it to then either try to display out messaging to the world based off of what that brand has made their messaging, right? So like Louis Vuitton purses, what's their pattern is just their logo. Like, you're just walking around with their logo in different ways. Like that's all you're walking around with is a logo, right? But by using that logo, you're associating yourself with a high value brand, and it says X, Y, and Z about you because you have that. And it would say something different than if you're carrying around an Adidas crossbody, fanny pack or something like that. That's a totally different message than a Louis Vuitton purse.
Yeah. And we also see brands get canceled when they make a mistake, and then people ostracize the brand because they don't want to be associated with the brand too. I remember when I was like 13, everyone was buying Abercrombie and Fitch clothing. And I remember just like all the shirts at the time, they just always had the name like plastered on the front of the shirt or the sweatshirt or whatever. And I didn't have any association with the brand. Actually, I did for a moment, but one of my classmates really liked the brand, and I didn't have a good affiliation with that person. And so it made me not want to wear the brand. And I remember saying when I was like a teenager, I'm like, why? Like, they should be paying us to wear their name on their shirts because it's free advertising.
Right.
Because I didn't have any affiliation or like positive experience with them. I like looked at them almost like annoyed because they reminded me of this person that wore it. So it's just funny how like that logo or the word mark can just create, visual connections in your brain, and then you have feelings from just the logo or the word. Hopefully usually positive, but sometimes not.
Yeah, that's our goal as Mosaic, right? Is you want to give people that positive association. And I think too, it's funny because we'll find tribes within that too, right? Like, you have people like, for example, I was wearing some Nikes one day, and some guy came up to me and started talking to me about my shoes, which, like, I'm not a sneakerhead. I like sneakers here and there, but like, I'm not like a sneakerhead. But he started like asking me all these questions, like talking about these different shoes, and I'm like, we're not of the same tribe, but you think I am because I'm wearing these shoes. And like, I want to get there with you, I do, but I'm not. But like, that happens in so many other ways that we don't even know, right? Like you said, the Abercrombie thing, like, you had a bad association with somebody that was wearing it, and then when you saw other people, you're like, you're not of my tribe. Like, that's kind of how that worked. Like, as a high schooler, like, I think as we get older, we move out of that a little bit more, hopefully, like, where it's like, yeah, there's still some associations, but like, that's a piece of you, not the whole part of you when you wear, a certain brand or whatever. But especially in high school, that's huge. It's like, what brand are you wearing? Are you a Nike or Adidas? Are you Abercrombie or Hollister? Are you American Eagle? Like, all this probably aging myself. Aeropostale.
I know, I'm like not even going to say it.
Yeah, you are.
I guess it's H&M and Zara. I don't know.
BMW, Mercedes.
Yeah. True. Yeah, like, BMW's got a bad rap. People hate on BMW owners. I love BMW owners, but just the brand. I think there's also another brand. I want to say it's Lululemon, but I don't know. I can't remember, but they want to control the brand aesthetic. And so I believe that you can take in like clothing that's old and like get them either fix there or like recycle them there. Like they'll accept old clothing. And I think that's probably a way to make sure that they're maintaining a brand integrity so that people aren't walking around with like ripped Lulu leggings or dirty clothes and again, I can't remember if it's them or if it's someone else, but I know they, at least one of them does it out there, more high-end brand.
Yeah, so they're thinking like, oh, our clothes don't rip.
Right.
We can't let people be walking around with our clothes ripped.
Mm-hmm.
That's next level.
Yeah,
it really is. Yeah, I think that's also a good point too, in that a lot of times when companies, depending on what your values are as a customer, and if the company matches those values well, you become an advocate for it, right? So if your value is high quality, sustainability, things of that nature, like good warranties, things like that, if you care about those type of things and you want to look this certain way, like Lululemon's probably a good fit for you, right? But like if you're like budget, comfort, and ease of access, Target's probably your choice. They'll both sell leggings. You can get leggings at both places, but what they say and what the values are of both those companies are different, and it'll attract a different kind of buyer. And then also based on that too, right? Like you talking about the Lululemon example is like, what are you going to tell your friends? Like, oh, like that, I had a rip in my seam and I sent it back to them and they fixed it and like it was great and the customer service was awesome, but it was a little bit pricey, but like totally worth it. And then there's another person that's going to be like, those are way too expensive. I'll just buy new ones at Target. Like, hey, I found these were $15. Like their value is saving the money, and like they don't care that it says Lululemon and they have a warranty and all of this. It's depending on what your values are and the company's values are, they line up, you become an advocate because they lined up so well with you, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh.
And I think you're muted.
You're muted.
There we go. I said, I'm an Aerie girl, so I love Aerie leggings as opposed to Lululemon leggings because I'm your latter thing that you said, Kyle, about I like to save the money. Yes, no, but I'm very particular with my leggings. I like Aerie leggings, and I also love they're not branded on the outside. And so with owning Beyond Bar, it's something that's really important to me to not project any sort of like trendy image. And so I don't really want to be in all Lulu wear because I don't want people to see me as some of the ways that Lulu is seen in the marketplace. I just want them to see me as more relatable and more down to earth, kind of like just I like to buy thrift things, and I don't need the most expensive leggings just because I'm the teacher. So, and it also goes well because I don't want to spend that much money on leggings anyway. So works out.
Yeah, I think I like that that's like the thing that we've been talking about, is that extra step of where brand becomes branding, right? And that I think that's what we've been talking about here, is like we've kind of shifted the conversation into not just the brand and that logo on the leggings, but what the leggings say when you have that logo on it. And that's the brand in action, right? So I think there's so many examples out there. Like we mentioned like Lululemon, we talked about, even Target, but like even Apple, right? Like what have they been built on is their brand. Not like, don't get me wrong, they have great technology. It works well. I'm an Apple fan. I will also tell other people, hey, if you want something easy to use, and that looks great all the time, Apple is the way to go. If you want functionality and the most cutting edge stuff, probably Samsung or somewhere along those lines. But I mean, I just got rid of a box that I had for like a year and a half. You know what I mean? Like I kept the box because like they implement the brand into the branding where like, you just pull that box up and just, the best feeling. And, but they play it out to the boxes, their website, even like everything that they're doing is brand based. And that's why they're one of the biggest companies in the world now after 25, 30 years of just implementing that brand over and over and over and reinforcing the brand. And like, even down to everybody saying they have AI on their phones. No, we have Apple Intelligence, right? It's AI, but it's Apple Intelligence. So they even brand AI. So that's where for a company like that, we can take notes of like, how are they doing it? Even down to the little product offerings that they're rolling out. They're looking at everything as like, how do we make this Apple? How do we not just make another feature? But that's an example that comes to my mind is them, but there's so many others out there too. Like you guys mentioned car manufacturers, right? Like there's so many examples out there: clothing, cars, where you shop, your grocery stores. All of that comes down to branding, why you're choosing those, and how their values match up with yours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been talking a lot about good branding, all these brands. I'm curious to hear from you guys where things go wrong, right? Like part of our work is helping people connect with their audience through their branding, and we consider it a necessary step to market your business, right? What happens if people don't do this? What happens if their branding's off? What are some problems that arise? I mean, we work in the digital universe a lot now, but we also have Beyond Bar, an in-person fitness studio. In both universes, where do these things go wrong?
Sienna, you can go first if you want.
I would say, okay, I'll start with just our own personal experience with Beyond Bar and Mosaic. But with Beyond Bar, so we've been open a year now, and I have yet to receive a client complaint. I'm sure it'll come eventually. It's inevitable, right? But because we've been so intentional about making sure our branding is consistent, or our brand is consistent, from how we email clients, how we teach, how we greet people, the way our studio is kept, the personalities that we have as teachers, etc. We've ensured as much, consistency in the way that we come across to people, even like decisions made. At one point, we thought we had to implement like a sales tax onto our membership fees, and we realized we didn't have to. But even the way I communicated that to the clients could have come with like a lot of pushback of like, this is not fair. I signed up for this. Now you're bumping the price up. But we sent an email that was very authentic to how I talk and my voice, and the way that the studio should come across. And we had not one complaint. In fact, I probably had 6 people tell me how well written the email was, and they're, sorry for us that this is the reality. Again, didn't end up having to happen, thank goodness. But that was one situation where when done well, it avoids all of those client complaints and all of the time spent dealing with all of the headaches, which I think is great. And then another example is like you just kind of lose control over how your brand is perceived if there's a lapse in judgment. So going back to Apple, and granted, I don't know the history as well as someone else might, but I just know like when Steve Jobs ran the company, they were known for the most cutting edge technology, where they were ahead of the game and they were kind of setting precedent for other technology companies who weren't as fast with their evolutions in the marketplace. But there was a couple years there, I think when after, Steve Jobs no longer ran the company, where they weren't evolving as quickly. So they lost, like what Kyla just said, they probably lost their place in the marketplace, are no longer seen as the most technologically advanced versus Samsung. But now they're more holding the marketplace of like aesthetic. And I think that's one example, like I think it did hurt them, but now they just own a different place regardless of if they wanted to appear one way or another. Because they had that lapse for a few years, they lost that control in their brand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think too, as far as like the ways that it can go wrong is in the same way that if, for example, like I was recently visiting my family and my parents wanted to watch The Voice, right? And it's an interesting thing because
Snoop Dogg.
Snoop, dude, don't get me started.
He's everywhere.
He is everywhere. He is literally everywhere. So that's a different branding conversation.
Yeah, he's got a crazy brand.
Yeah, Snoop Dogg.
Yeah, for real. Talk about branding. Sorry.
But yeah, where I was going with that was the premise is you have one idea of what the brand is going to be based on what you're hearing, right? And then they turn around and they see something, and sometimes what they hear and what they see are completely different things. And they'll say like, there was, for example, I think like a 14-year-old kid, killer voice, but Snoop Dogg turned around, for example, and he's like, I thought I was listening to a 30-year-old woman, He's like, that's crazy. He like took his sunglasses off. He's like, I thought I was listening to a 30-year-old woman. And amazing, like, right? But that's such an example of like what people hear, the branding in action, and what people see, the brand, can sometimes not connect, and it makes your mind just like, for a second you have to figure it out, right? But like you play that out in a way that's negative, where it's like they see this brand that looks super high tech, cutting edge, and then they experience the brand and it's antiquated and breaks all the time. Like those two things don't match up, and now what's your perception of the brand, right? Like you're telling people, oh, their brand looks great, but, or the opposite, right? Like, oh, their product's great, but. So like you have to start making excuses for the brand, either one way or the other. The brand is either better than the product, or the product is better than the brand, and you have to make excuses as the customer when you're trying to advocate for them, right? Or the opposite, where you're trying to say like their branding was great, but I got duped, is what you felt like because the product wasn't as good. If anything, you'd probably rather your product be better than your brand. You know what I mean? 'Cause at the end of the day, you want people to continue to buy your product, but the ideal situation is they're both on the same level.
Yeah.
At a minimum, like you want them at the same level, but I would say that's where it can go wrong, is if you don't have those things aligned, your customers will make excuses one way or the other about they're going to tell the story for you at the end of the day. So making sure that you have both those boxes checked in appropriate ways, and ways that you want people to talk about your brand, I think is important. I think Sienna touching on that with even down to the emails, right? It's not just the logo that you made or the beautiful website that you guys have or the social media posts that you're making. It's also even the email. The email about a price update matters. So
yeah. I mean, truly, the aesthetic stuff is worth nothing if you can't put that into action. I'm thinking of, like, while you're talking, Kyle, so many experiences I've had that were just like so incongruent and left me with like a bad taste in my mouth. There was like one person that I connected with, and their appearance on my first impression was so strong of who they were. I'm like thinking they're so professional on top of everything. And then my the email correspondence completely shifted my impression because it felt so unprofessional. And so then I was left with the negative. Like, you don't really assume the best naturally. It's like, oh, I guess they weren't as professional as I thought. Versus, well, I guess their emails weren't as great as, like, it's always kind of the lesser, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And that's why I'm always surprised when brands, like big brands like Nike, for instance, or even like Progressive, is Flow the one with Progressive?
Yeah. Yep.
Like when the companies will have like a person be the face of the business because they're putting so much trust in that person to maintain the brand. Yeah. And I think, didn't it happen with Kanye? Didn't he have a deal with Adidas or Nike? Yeah. And so once he started getting polarizing, they dropped him because they were like, we cannot risk having this guy be the face of our business because he's turbulent. So it was surprising.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, like branding gets tied into this for service-based businesses. Your service is also part of your branding. Yeah. Your process, how you work with people. Yeah.
I think you can even. I think some people think too. Like, there's a misconception that only certain types of businesses have to worry about this type of thing, but it really is like any successful business has to think about these things. And that, like, even if you're a solopreneur doing plumbing work, right? Like, you need to be thinking through, like, not just how your van looks. Like, do you have papers all over the front of your dashboard? And, like, is it, dirty and beat up? And, and don't get me wrong, everybody starts somewhere. So if you can only afford that beat up van, that's a totally different situation. But, like, the paper's all over the place. And then you show up late to the meeting with the client, and then you end up leaving their house a mess. Like, that's a brand that you're showing your brand right there versus the one that comes in. Yeah. They're respectful of time. If anything, they're maybe a little bit early. Paperwork is there, looks tidy. You leave the place as good, if not better, than you found it. Like, that is a brand that they will then go out and tell their friend, hey, if you ever need a plumber, I got a great guy. He came in, did this, or I have a great girl, whoever it is. Like, they did this, this, and this, and they left it in this way. And I think that's something that people don't think about. Like, that is your brand. Like, that's the branding, and then the brand is the logo. As Sienna said, I think would be a better way to clarify that.
And that also shows, like, you can also be not known, but like you can really make a difference in the branding for things that are outside of what you're selling. So for instance, we were getting some work on our house done, and they're amazing craftsmen, these people. But something I was really impressed by was the way they always left our house. It was always, everything was cleaned up. So like, even if there were days in between they were here, when they were not here, our house was clean versus looking like a construction site. And so that was something that I didn't hire them for, but it really stood out to me, and a reason that I would absolutely hire them again, of just the way they respected my space. Again, not what they sell, but it was a differentiating factor of why I would hire them again over someone else.
Yeah, that was something that my dad always. I worked with him in construction for a little bit when I was a teenager, but that was something at the end of every day. Last 15 minutes, time to put down the hammer and pick up a broom. And we're all just going to clean for 15 minutes. And even if the customer's not coming through and it's like a construction project and not like a new build versus a renovation, still, like, we don't want the customer to come in tonight if they were to drop by and see that there's nails all over the place and boards in places and like things are dangerous and leaving things halfway done. So like there was always like that level of wrap the cords up, do this, like sweep the floors, last 15 minutes of the day every day. And that was part of the brand, right? So now when the customer does a routine drop by, they know they're in good hands. They know like these guys, they're not disorganized. They know what they're doing. They got a system. Like, so yeah.
Which brings up another point of sometimes it's really hard to differentiate your services from another business services. But when you think about more of how to be a human how to be a good human, I should say, outside of what you're directly delivering, that could really differentiate you. And so just a pro tip to whoever is listening, like if your business services are really similar to someone else and you're having a hard time figuring out how can I be different? I actually did this when I was younger, like when I created Mosaic, I'm like, well, there's how many agencies out there? Like, why would mine be successful when they can choose literally anyone? And part of my reasoning was like, well, I'm just going to be a human and I'm going to talk to people like a human. I'm going to give people advice with integrity and not own self-seeking, suggestions. We're going to try to avoid greed, like not having greed, not having pride in our business, and just kind of seeing where that leads. And I think people really see that. And so just one suggestion for people is like to how to think outside the box a little bit and think like, where can I be more humane in my business, and how to kind of be more front facing with that to make a difference over someone else. Like, for instance, our network provider, who is it again? Is it Comcast?
Yeah, Comcast. Yep.
So Denisio and I, like, have had the worst experience with Comcast because they just keep increasing the prices, and our services are like, it is such awful service. And so as soon as we have another option, we're out of there, right? So there's no brand loyalty. We're just waiting for someone else to rise to the occasion and think, all right, I'm going to be more of a human than the services that I've experienced with Comcast. And we're jumping. I don't even care if it's more expensive. We're jumping because it's like, we're just so fed up, So, just bringing the human back into branding is such a powerful tool that I don't think people really realize.
For sure. And also just from because I'm the non-creative on this team of creatives. So just to kind of pull where we're at now, which is we went from brand to branding and how that plays out in your service and the work that you deliver. Can we tie that back to brand again? So now we're talking about actionable things and adjectives that describe the work and how we do it, how we're differentiated. So for the non-visual folks out there, non-creatives, how does that then get articulated? So now we've described it. How does that get articulated in the brand and the way that brand is communicated?
Just to be clear, when you're saying articulated in the brand, you're talking about the logo piece of the brand?
Yeah, the experience that people have as they're interacting with your brand before even experienced in service.
Oh, so all the visual.
And the copywriting, right?
Got it. Kyle, do you want to take something?
Yeah. So as far as that's concerned, that's where I think marketing starts to enter into the branding conversation, where now people haven't experienced your brand directly, right? That's where marketing is in that conversation. It's kind of the middleman between your brand nobody knows about and then people know about your brand, right? Marketing is that middleman that gets them from not knowing about you to knowing about you and hopefully experiencing your service. So that's the goal of it, is you're trying to drive people to actually go to the service. And as far as that's concerned, you kind of touched on it, like copywriting. That's one of the things. Sienna talking about the email. That's one of those things, like how you're talking to people digitally would be a digital form of marketing, right? And then also the graphics that you're choosing and how you're displaying that information is another way. So that can be played out, whether it's in social posts, it could be your website, it can be all these different pieces. It could be this podcast, right? This is a piece of the brand where people are interacting with this, and somebody could be watching this podcast, for example, that doesn't actually use our services, but now has a positive association with our brand because we're trying to give them value for free, right? So we're trying to tell them stuff that we know and help them. And so now they're seeing us as somebody that wants to help them, right? Before they've even bought something from us. So that's a way, like a podcast can be an example. LinkedIn, same thing. You want to provide value. You want to be giving value within your posts long before you ever ask for anything. Like that's just a rule of thumb. And it doesn't matter what type of company you are, play by those rules and you'll do better on digital media. Try to help people. And that's what we do as business people, right? Like we're trying to help people with a problem that we've identified that we think we can solve. And so marketing is just telling people in different ways of how we help solve the problem that they're coming across. So whether it be, we serve a whole host of clients. So with that, we have to try to figure out their different audiences. We have to figure out what the problems that they solve are, and then ways to communicate that to hit those pain points. And so those are ways that digitally we accomplish that, would be in the way that we write copy to help, the way that we create graphics that utilize brand colors, brand fonts, brand logos, all these different assets, textures. We're thinking through all that stuff of how this looks like so-and-so's brand, right? Like when we make a graphic, people should look at that and say, that's a Mosaic graphic when it's on the Mosaic page, right? So they shouldn't have to look at what the badge is next to it to try and figure out who made this post. They should look at the graphic and say, this is Mosaic, right? If it's on our page. Again, one thing that we're proud of is that we try not to have our brand play out on our customers' brand, if that makes sense. So we try not to say like we have a Mosaic look that people, when they work with us, get that look. I'm speaking mostly to just the Mosaic brand as itself. And so, yeah, so when people, even the copy is another example, and I don't want to go too far on a tangent here, but even the copy, like the way that you're writing things, like, are you a little bit like spunky in how you're talking? Are you a little bit quirky? Are you, very professional? Like those are things that if it should align with your brand on all of those posts, where if you're a super professional brand, then all of a sudden you're cracking jokes and using emojis, people are like, what are you talking about? So making sure all those different pieces align are important. And again, though, like to tie back, they should all help solve the problem for your audience is what we're trying to do as business people. But then also we want to make sure that service backs up the level that the brand is at. So all of that to say, the service is the first thing that we need to prioritize, and then we can build a brand off of the quality of the service to make sure that the customer experience, from the way that they see it digitally online to how they experience it in person, is one seamless thing, and they don't have to say but, right? That's what we want to avoid, is a but. Like the product's good, but the branding's good, but. So we want to avoid that. That's how we make advocates for our brand that just say the whole experience was X, Y, and Z.
And playing off that too, and Kyle, you mentioned this before we were talking, but like no one will likely talk about your brand like explicitly. They're going to just talk about the experience they have with you. And so if you don't hear people talking about, oh, I love your logo, or the fonts you chose are just immaculate, it's probably a good thing, because then they're more consumed with the overall experience that you're providing them as a business. It's all just like pieces of the puzzle, but the puzzle is, what the ultimate goal is, completing the puzzle, I will say, in that analogy. So I just wanted to put that out there too. So don't be discouraged if people aren't talking about your colors. Just think more about strategically of what the colors are doing for you, and hopefully it is achieving the goal that was set out in the design.
Does that answer your question, Dee?
It sure does.
That's a great question.
Sure does.
But yeah, I think just to kind of wrap it up, my thought would be, and I think we touched on this a bit too, is, and you just kind of pointed to this, Sienna, is that when you're doing all these things right, you're likely not getting the feedback directly from people of like, you're doing everything right. Like they're not just going to say, like, they're not typically going to come and say like all of these things of like your brand, like they're not identifying all these things are right. But that being said, they know that the experience was right. And that's what's going to make them into an advocate, right? An advocate is somebody that just, the expectations and the reality were perfectly in line. And that person's now an advocate for you, because your values aligned with their values and your brand aligned with the product, and all that stuff just made sense. And that's what's going to make somebody go out and just tell the world about the experience that they just had, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, they're not gonna shout your brand is amazing from the rooftops, but they're gonna buy your service. They're gonna book that speaking gig, right? Like that all of those things have a higher degree of probability. So.
And I mean, in the event that you do have such a profound impact, they may also market for you by talking to people about who you are. That's like it's no secret that word of mouth referrals are the best way to sell. But the only way to do word of mouth referrals is to have a consistent brand across the board so that no one ever has a negative touch point in your experience with them. And something I want to close with on my end is I actually did remember a time where I went off brand with my bar studio, and I said something in email that was just more, I would say less human than I normally do. It was more transactional. And that was the one time that I did have someone send me more of a complaining email saying they were disappointed. And that kind of, instead of thinking, wow, this person is so difficult and annoying, I first thought, oh shoot, what could I have done differently to not have that outcome? And that was a nod to myself of like, okay, this did not feel as human. And when I say human, I mean more like the good qualities. This didn't feel as human as I have in all of the other touch points. So I need to edit that decision there. So because of that, now as a studio, we don't charge our clients fees. So a lot of other studios will charge late fees or no-show fees. And when we can avoid it, I'm just not a fee studio, because I just don't think fees are the human. I think they're totally out for kind of scraping to get money any way they could. And that definitely impacts our bottom line. But to me, it's more important that people have a positive experience with us. And it's worth it to me that I don't spend hours and hours addressing complaining emails of people having problems with that. So
That's a great final example there.
One example of how branding can save you hours and hours of time. Good branding.
That's right.
Yeah, because I probably spent an hour trying to respond to her. That was an hour that, like, think about how much that would cost me over time. So.
Yeah, if you do that repeatedly, right, where you have to continue to do that because you're covering for something that you did that was off brand a couple times.
Yeah. So maybe like the call to action from this is for users or for listeners is just to think about all the times that they've run into conflict with their clients and see it as opportunities to figure out how to align the result of that conflict into what they had hoped that experience would have been and what they could have controlled to have that desired outcome versus the less desired outcome.
Yeah, I think that's a great ending note.
I agree. That begins a lesson in entrepreneurship versus branding.
Yeah. That's another conversation. Awesome, guys. Thank you.
Thanks.